You open your eyes in the dark. There is no sound of battle. For the first time in generations, the silence of peace is the morning's melody. But this is not the peace of harmony. It is the peace of submission. The warring states, which for centuries bloodied this land, are no more. Their kings are dead, their walls torn down, their histories being erased. Now, there is only one power, one will, one name that is dared to be whispered: Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor. You rise from your straw bed, and the air you breathe feels different. It is the air of a new world, an empire forged in fire and ruled by iron. Old loyalties are crimes. Old thoughts treason. Your neighbor could be your brother, or the spy who will seal your fate. Every coin, every road, every word you use has been shaped by the emperor's relentless hand. This is the story of a day under his shadow, an experiment to understand what it meant to be a grain of sand in the foundation of unified China. Welcome to the Qin Empire. Pay your taxes, and be careful what you wish for. Your home is not a castle. It is a cell in the great body of the empire. The rammed earth walls and wooden frame are simple, designed for maximum functionality and minimum comfort. Your family's life unfolds in 1 or 2 rooms around a central hearth, the epicenter of warmth and food. You sleep on straw mats, and your few belongings, pottery jars, farming tools, and perhaps some hemp clothing, are stored in chests. As a peasant, the state has allowed your family to own this land, a radical change. But this ownership came at a price. Your family is not just a family, it is a unit of production. Every grain of rice or millet you harvest is counted. An overwhelming portion is destined for the state granaries to feed the armies and the workers on the great projects. Life is a precarious balance between subsistence and imperial duty. Every day is a calculation for survival, knowing that your small home exists only to serve a much greater purpose. Privacy is an illusion. The walls of your house are thin, but mistrust is the thickest barrier that separates you from your neighbors. The emperor, through his legalist system, instituted the Baojia, mutual surveillance. Your family is part of a group of 5 to 10 households, and all are legally responsible for each other's crimes. If the head of the neighboring family hides a forbidden book or complains about taxes, and you do not report him, your own family will be punished with the same severity, often with forced labor or execution. Silence becomes complicity. The system turns every neighbor into a potential spy and every conversation into a calculated risk. This network of fear and collective responsibility is the empire's most effective tool of control. It needs no guards on every corner, for it turns ordinary citizens into guardians of the state's order, ensuring that loyalty to the emperor supplants any bond of community. In your village, the true wall is not made of stone, but of fear. The knowledge your grandfather revered is now ash. You live in an era of intellectual silence, a direct result of the imperial policy of burning the books and burying the scholars. The emperor's agents have confiscated the chronicles of the conquered kingdoms, the philosophical texts, the poems, and the teachings of the 100 schools of thought. Almost everything was thrown into the flames. To keep a text by Confucius or a poem praising a former lord was not just illegal. It was an act of treason punishable by death. The goal was brutal and clear: to erase the past so that no idea could challenge the present. Critical thinking, debate, and philosophy were replaced by blind obedience to the law. The only permitted books are practical ones: manuals on agriculture, medicine, and divination. The empire does not want you to think, but to obey. Historical memory is being forcibly rewritten, and fire was the primary tool to ensure that only one story could be told: that of the glory and absolute power of Qin. While ancient knowledge burned in flames, a new form of power was being etched onto bamboo scrolls. The emperor ordered the unification of writing. The dozens of calligraphic styles that varied among the old states were abolished and replaced by a single set of standardized characters, the small seal script. This was not a mere aesthetic reform. It was an administrative revolution. Now, a decree written in the capital, Xianying, could be read and understood without ambiguity by an official in the most remote province. Laws, military orders, tax records, and engineering projects could be communicated with unprecedented efficiency. With brush and ink, the bureaucrats became the nerves of the empire, transmitting the emperor's will to every corner of the unified land. By forcing everyone to write in the same way, Qin Shi Huang not only created a powerful bureaucracy, but also planted the seed of a shared cultural identity that would outlast the dynasty itself and define what it meant to be Chinese forever. In unified China, justice is not a matter of morals or honor. It is an equation. Legalism, the empire's governing philosophy, dictates that the law is absolute, transparent, and impersonal. It does not matter if you are a noble or a peasant. The law applies to you equally. In theory, it is a fair system. In practice, it is terrifying. For every crime, there is a specific and invariably severe punishment, detailed in the law codes distributed throughout the empire. Stealing an ox, fleeing from mandatory labor, harboring a deserter, each offense has its price in forced labor, mutilation, or death. There is no room for mercy or extenuating circumstances. The system's intention is not to rehabilitate, but to deter through fear. You live knowing that the web of rules is vast, and its claws are sharp. The order that reigns in the streets and fields is maintained not by the loyalty of men, but by their fear of the relentless and inescapable logic of the emperor's law. If you are found guilty, do not expect to languish in a cell. The Qin Empire does not waste resources, especially manpower. Prisons are, for the most part, just waiting places. The real sentence is forced labor. Convicts from all over the empire are transformed into a disposable workforce, chained and sent to the monumental projects that are the pride and backbone of the state. You see them marching in long lines. Men whose crime was to be late for military service or to fail to pay their taxes on time. Now, they break rocks under the scorching sun to erect the Great Wall, a nameless tomb for thousands. Others are sent to pave the vast imperial roads or to build the grandest of all works, the emperor's secret mausoleum, with its army of terracotta warriors. Their crime has stripped them of their name and their humanity, turning them into mere tools for the construction of Qin Shi Huang's eternal glory. You walk on a road like none you have ever seen. Straight, wide, and elevated, it cuts through valleys and plains with a relentless determination. This is one of the emperor's direct roads, the arteries that pump power from the capital, Xianying, to the entire body of China. They were not built for your comfort, but for the speed of the state. Their standardized width allows troops to march quickly to crush any sign of rebellion before it can grow. Along them, tax collectors travel efficiently, ensuring that the wealth of the provinces flows unimpeded to the imperial treasury. Horseback messengers gallop along these routes, carrying decrees on bamboo scrolls that can seal the fate of an entire city in a matter of days. These roads are not an invitation to travel, but an instrument of control. They are the physical proof of the emperor's omnipresence, a network that ensnares every valley and mountain, ensuring that no place is truly far from the reach of his iron will. If you look to the north, to the arid mountains that mark the border of the civilized world, you will see the most ambitious and brutal of all projects. It is not a single wall, but the forced joining of dozens of ancient barriers, connected by new sections of rammed earth, stone, and the bodies of countless laborers. This is the Long Wall of 10,000 Li. Its purpose is singular, to keep the barbarians out. The nomadic Xiongnu tribes, swift horsemen of the steppes, are a constant threat. The wall is the empire's answer, a monumental defensive line, garrisoned by soldiers, that separates the agricultural and orderly world of China from the chaos of the northern lands. To you, it is a symbol of security, but also a reminder of the empire's human cost. Every watchtower, every meter of compacted earth, was paid for with the sweat and blood of hundreds of thousands of convicts and conscripted peasants, many of whom died there, their bodies buried in the very structure they helped to build. In your hand, you hold a small bronze disc with a square hole in the center. It is a Ban Liang coin. Before it, trade was chaos. Each of the old kingdoms had its own currency, some shaped like knives, others like spades, each with a different weight and value. Buying or selling something from a neighboring region was a nightmare of calculations and mistrust. Now, that is over. The emperor abolished all old currencies, melting them down to forge this one, the only legal unit of exchange in all of China. This standardization transformed the economy. A merchant can now travel from north to south using the same coin, facilitating trade on an unimaginable scale. More importantly, the state can now collect taxes in a unified and efficient manner. This small piece of metal is not just money, it is a symbol of the centralization of power, an instrument that ensures all the wealth of the empire can be measured, controlled, and, finally, funneled to the capital. You hear the sound of an approaching cart and notice something extraordinary: the smoothness with which it moves. Before unification, the dirt roads were a chaotic labyrinth of ruts of different widths, as each region built carts with its own standards. A long journey meant constant bumps or the need to change vehicles. The emperor, in his obsessive quest for efficiency, decreed one of the most brilliant and simple of all standardizations: the width of cart axles. Now, all carts fit perfectly into the ruts of the new imperial roads. What seemed like a trivial detail was a logistical revolution. The transport of grain from the fields to the state granaries, the movement of supplies to the army on the Great Wall, and the flow of goods became exponentially faster and easier. By standardizing the simple axle of a cart, the emperor not only fixed the roads, he quickened the pulse of the empire. The throne that rules your life is occupied by a paradox. Qin Shi Huang, the man who unified the world, is driven as much by genius as by a deep-seated fear. You hear stories of his tireless inspection tours, journeys that take him to every corner of his vast domain. But these are not just the trips of an administrator. They are the escapes of a man who fears stagnation and an assassin's dagger. It is said that he never sleeps in the same palace 2 nights in a row, and that secret passages connect all his chambers. His greatest obsession, however, is death. He finances expensive expeditions in search of mystical islands and elixirs that promise eternal life. The architect of the most relentless order China has ever known is, at his core, a man desperately fighting against the final disorder of his own body, terrified by the mortality that applies to all, except, in his mind, to him. You do not refer to your ruler as King Huang. That is a title for mortals. Qin Shi Huang created a new one for himself, Huangdi, or emperor. It is a word that combines the terms for, august, and divine, elevating him to an unprecedented status, a direct link to the heavens. This is not just a title, it is a declaration of divinity. During his travels, he erects stone steels on sacred mountains, engraving his deeds upon them for all to read. The inscriptions speak not of a simple ruler, but of a cosmic force that brought order to chaos, pacified the land, and unified the universe. This relentless propaganda is everywhere. It aims to ensure that you see your leader not as a conqueror, but as the fulfillment of a celestial destiny. Obedience is demanded not only by law but by religion. You are taught to fear his power and revere his figure, the man-god whose absolute power is presented as the very will of the heavens. The peace you live in was bought with blood by the deadliest war machine these lands have ever seen. When you see a Qin legion marching, you do not see a band of warriors, but a system. The discipline is iron. Each soldier wields standardized bronze weapons, mass-produced in state arsenals, spears, swords, and, above all, the fearsome crossbow, a weapon capable of piercing armor at a great distance. But the army's true strength is its brutal meritocracy. Here, Noble birth means nothing. Promotion, land, and titles are earned in only one way, by presenting the severed heads of enemies. This policy turns every soldier into a relentless hunter, motivated by a thirst for personal advancement that translates into unparalleled ferocity on the battlefield. The Qin army not only conquered kingdoms, it annihilated entire armies, paving the way for unification with terrifying efficiency. Hidden beneath the earth, not far from the capital, another army stands in silence and formation. It is the Emperor's personal guard for eternity. Thousands of life-size clay soldiers, each with a unique face, detailed armor, and real weapons, are arranged in battle pits, ready to defend their master in the afterlife. There are archers, officers, generals, and cavalry with their chariots. This monumental work, kept secret during its construction, reveals the scale of Qin Shi Huang's vision and power. He not only intended to rule the world of the living, but also to command the world of spirits. The existence of this Terracotta Army is the ultimate proof of his power, the ability to mobilize hundreds of thousands of artisans and laborers for a funerary project, creating an immortal replica of the war machine that gave him control over everything. It is an army that will never march, but it represents the boundless ambition of the first emperor. The land you plow with your own hands is now yours. This is the promise and the trap of the emperor's land reform. The old feudal system, where you worked a noble's land in exchange for protection, has been abolished. Now, you are a landowner. This new freedom, however, comes with a new leash. By eliminating the intermediary lords, the state has made you directly accountable to it. Your family is registered, your land is measured, and your production is taxed with relentless efficiency. You no longer owe loyalty or a portion of the harvest to a local lord, but to the distant and insatiable imperial treasury. The reform was not an act of generosity. It was a strategic calculation. By turning millions of peasants into small landowners and direct taxpayers, the emperor ensured a constant and massive flow of grain and revenue, creating the solid economic base needed to finance his wars, his projects, and his absolute power. Your harvest, and that of millions like you, depends not only on sweat and luck but on monumental engineering. Qin's power is expressed not only in walls, but also in water. The empire maintained and expanded colossal irrigation projects, like the Dujianjian system. This engineering marvel, built before unification, was harnessed and expanded to tame the Min River, diverting its waters to irrigate the fertile Chengdu plains. By controlling floods and ensuring a constant supply of water, these projects transformed entire regions into the empire's breadbaskets. The resulting agricultural abundance is what sustains everything: the army on the northern frontier, the workers erecting the palaces and the mausoleum, and the very bureaucracy that administers your life. You plant your seeds in a land pacified by the sword, but which only becomes fertile thanks to the genius of engineers, who, in the name of the state, tame the rivers themselves. While you work under the sun, rumors of a very different quest spread in the ports. The emperor, the man who commands the life and death of millions, does not accept his own end. You hear of the great fleets, ships laden with treasures and hundreds of young people, sent to the eastern sea under the command of magicians and alchemists. Their mission is not to conquer, but to find Ban Liang, the legendary island where the 8 immortals reside, and where the elixir of eternal life can be found. To you, these stories are almost myths, tales of ghost ships that never return. But they are real. The state, which demands every grain of your harvest with cold logic, spends unimaginable fortunes on a desperate and mystical quest. The ruler who banned philosophy and poetry in favor of absolute pragmatism is himself betting the empire's treasury on a legend, revealing that his greatest fear is not enemy armies, but time. The quest for immortality is not only taking place on distant seas, but also in the secret chambers of the palace. There, alchemists work day and night, not with legends, but with minerals. and they believe they have found the substance of eternal life, mercury. To them, this liquid, silvery metal, which seems alive, is the key to longevity. The emperor, in his eagerness to cheat death, likely consumed small pills of mercury prepared by his most trusted advisors. It is the most tragic irony. The substance he believes to be the elixir of life is, in fact, a slow and potent poison. You might hear rumors about the emperor's unstable health, his fits of rage, and his growing paranoia. You do not know the cause, but the mercury is, most likely, destroying his body and his mind. The man who unified China in search of an eternal order is, inadvertently, hastening his own chaotic end through that very same search. The center of the universe, the man-god who declared himself eternal, is dead. The news, initially concealed by the court in a desperate maneuver, finally spreads like wildfire. The fear that held the empire together evaporates, and in its place, hatred arises. Power, so absolutely concentrated in a single man, reveals its fatal fragility. His heir is weak, a puppet in the hands of treacherous eunuchs and ministers. The brutal pressure the empire exerted on the people for 15 years finally finds a breaking point. Suddenly, all across China, rebellions explode. Peasants, led by men with nothing left to lose, take up arms. Descendants of the old nobility, humiliated and dispossessed, see their chance for revenge. The relentless order of Qin dissolves into bloody chaos. The dynasty that was forged to last for 10,000 generations barely survives for 3 years after its founder's death, collapsing with the same speed and violence with which it was built. Qin Shi Huang's empire turns to dust, but his vision refuses to die. The Qin Dynasty was short, brutal, and a failure in its own longevity. However, the mold it created for China proved to be eternal. The idea of a unified nation under a central government, once a philosopher's dream, was now a proven reality. The next dynasty, the Han, would rise from the ashes of the rebellion. Although they repudiated Qin's tyranny, they built their lasting empire on the foundations he left behind: the unified script, the roads, the single currency, and, most importantly, the structure of a centralized bureaucratic state. The brutality of Qin passed, but its legacy remained etched not in stone, but in the very conception of China. The dream of all under heaven, belonging to a single empire, was forged by Qin, and this idea would define the destiny of this civilization for the next 2,000 years. If you have reached the end of this journey, it is because you understand that an empire can fall, but its ideas can shape the world forever. The echo of Qin's will still resonate in history. To continue unraveling the projects, tyrannies, and legacies of the great empires of the past, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so our expedition through history never gets lost. Leave your comment. Was the Qin Dynasty an act of administrative genius or unsustainable tyranny? We want to know your opinion. And share this video with someone else who is fascinated by how power builds and destroys worlds, because every share keeps this great discussion alive. Our time in Xianying ends here, but our journey through history is just beginning. Thank you for watching.